World War I brought destruction to France. 5 million people were killed and wounded during the war. Many small towns and villages were obliterated. France went into the Peace of Paris on the offensive. They were trying to negotiate reparations from Germany to pay for the destruction of France. They got what they wanted, and the Treaty of Versailles forced Germany to make reparation payments. With these reparations from Germany, the French government promised to rebuild France. When the money from Germany did not come, the French Prime Minister Raymond Poincaré sent 40,000 troops into the Ruhr to force Germany to make the reparation payments. This did not do anything to help because it cost more raw materials than were extracted, and ended up causing the implementation of the Dawes Plan. The Dawes Plan lowered reparation payments, which meant the French government could not pay to rebuild their country. To get around the problem of not having enough money from the reparation payments, the French government paid for reconstruction by issuing bonds. On Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed. This triggered a global economic depression that would last until the beginning of World War II. In May 1931, one of Vienna's most powerful banks, the Credit Anstalt, collapsed. This created a domino effect and brought the economic depression to Europe. The franc became undervalued and France switched to the gold standard. The gold standard prevented countries from escaping the economic depression by using controlled inflation. The gold standard's problems were made even worse by people trying to deal with depression in the way that was common belief. This way was characterized by tightening the supply of money until all the bad loans went bust and the failed companies went bankrupt. More than 800,000 French workers lost their jobs, and switching to the gold standard was not France's only solution to the economic problems caused by the Great Depression. Another way France tried to deal with their economic problems was by making budget cuts. This caused public outrage and led to public strife during the 1930s. The 1930s in France were full of public strife because of post-war demoralization and stagnant population growth. Also, the government made budget cuts because of the Great Depression, which caused more public strife. Under these conditions, fascism rose in France, and Nazi-style paramilitary groups flourished. During these years, there were many protests. One particular protest was bigger than the rest and turned into a riot. On February 6, 1934, extreme right-wing activists and war veterans protested what they called ruling corruption of the central-left government. This protest quickly turned violent and 13 people were killed. Numerous more people were injured as the police tried to fight off attempts to storm the French Parliament. The protesters were trying to topple the left-wing government. The following day, the government stepped down. Even though the left-wing government stepped down, the right wing lacked support outside of Paris to take over the government. Also, the right wing lacked a charismatic leader like Mussolini or Hitler. The French liberals, socialists, and communists were shocked by the outbreak of this violence. This led them to establish the Popular Front. This coalition had been impossible before because Stalin had directed communists across Europe not to cooperate with other parties. As fascism became more popular, Stalin reversed his previous position and allowed communists to join with other parties to protect democracy. After the protests of February 6, 1934, a 62-year-old man that would eventually become the Prime Minister of France worked to unite the opponents of fascism in France. This man was Léon Blum. He was the creator of the modern French Socialist Party. His efforts to unite the opponents of fascism in France culminated in the creation of the Popular Front. In the elections of April and May 1936, the Popular Front won a large majority in the parliament. Blum became the prime minister as the leader of the Popular Front movement in June 1936. He was the first socialist and the first Jewish to become prime minister. His government introduced, despite considerable opposition, the 40-hour workweek and secured paid vacation and collective bargaining for many of France's workers. Blum's most difficult problem was what to do about the growing power of the Rome-Berlin axis. His policy of non-intervention in the Spanish Civil War was denounced as appeasement by some French people. Blum planned to establish state controls over private industry and finance. These plans were met with bitter hostility from business leaders, and it was at this time that the right wing came up with the slogan, "Better Hitler than Blum." His plans to establish state control of private industry and finance never came to fruition, and in June 1937, Blum resigned after the conservative majority refused to grant him emergency powers to take care of France's financial problems. France was governed by various governments from both the left and the right in the 1930s. One of the governments during this time was a coalition of liberals, socialists, and communists. They were called the Popular Front. They were formed because of the need for a stronger working class and popular unity. These things were needed because of the Great Depression and because of Hitler coming to power in Germany. France also needed to confront the growth of fascism. To the French people, fascism seemed like a real danger because of the 1934 riots. The initial attraction of the Popular Front was the idea of unity and a collaborative defense against fascism by the French people. The Popular Front not only attracted workers and peasants, but also people from the lower middle class. This meant they had a great amount of support in the beginning, but eventually the initial attraction trickled off. Also, the more powerful people in the French social hierarchy did not support the Popular Front because they favored state control of private industry and finance. The Popular Front had some successes early on, but Leon Blum's government was politically weak. Bankers and industrialists sent their money out of France to protest the Popular Front. The upper classes created the slogan, "Better Hitler than Blum." This was because of what Blum wanted to do, allow the government to control private industry and finance. Another reason for Blum's failure was his inability to control the domestic economy. After the Popular Front won the elections in May and April of 1936, French workers struck to celebrate the victory of the Popular Front, which was a socialist-dominated party. Blum was forced to make many concessions to force them to go back to work. The right wing had many reasons to hate Blum. He was a socialist, he was intelligent, and he was Jewish. The right wing's dislike was only solidified by these concessions. The right wing's hatred of Blum, the striking of the workers, and the bankers and industrialists sending their money out of the country was enough to make Blum's brainchild, the Popular Front, collapse. Despite this collapse, the Popular Front was not a total failure. France went into World War I with a strong economy because of Blum's reforms.